All right, check, check, check. Looks like everything's working. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Excellent. I slept through my alarm. Ah. So I can't decide whether I got extra sleep or whether I'm too sleepy. Probably a little bit of both. But in any case, we have to carry on. So let's start the screen share and get to the lecture. So today, we've got a little bit to finish off from last time. We left off right around here. We were going to look at what the science says about free will. Yeah, isn't that weird? I mean, I tried to go to bed early as well, and then I couldn't fall asleep, tossing and turning and whatnot. And I guess I must have fallen asleep much later than usual because I actually used this as an example in the class I just taught, my consciousness class, a couple different senses in which you can be conscious or unconscious. I don't know whether I was unconscious in the sense that I just slept through the alarm, or if I was unconscious in the sense that I did one of those, uh, uh, boop, turn the alarm off and keep sleeping without realizing what you're doing. I was unconscious in either case. I'm just not sure which one happened. Um, yeah, isn't that weird? Yeah, that happens to me sometimes. Like after this class, I'll feel excellent, even though I'm probably running on 4 hours. Um, it's the weirdest thing. I don't know. But anyway, um, let us pick up from where we left off. This is about where we were. I take a little bit of liberty here. I depart from the textbook just a little bit. Um, Crumley mentions Benjamin Liebe and his studies on intentional volition and the readiness potential, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this in some detail. Um, simply uh, because I think it's worth doing so. So let me get this out of the way here. So since around the 1960s, we've known that voluntary actions are preceded by what we call a readiness potential, which is a slow negative shift in electrical potential. And we measure this with an EEG or an electroencephalograph. You you might have even had one of these. Um, they're used diagnostically to help diagnose certain kinds of epilepsy, but they're also used in experimental settings. So, in case you're not familiar, here, I'll just bring myself back here. If you've ever seen something like, it looks a bit like a shower, almost like a shower cap or a swimming cap that you put on, and it has all these little electrodes on it. And it's hooked up to a computer. Um, what those electrodes are doing is measuring changes in electrical potential from the scalp. And those changes are happening because of neural activity in the brain, because the brain is an electrochemical organ. It uses chemical changes which result, because of the kinds of chemical changes that happen, changes in electrical potential. And this is how neurons fire. I don't want to get into the neurophysiology of it too much. But the point is, we can detect these changes in electrical potential using the electrodes on an electroencephalograph. And one of the changes is called the readiness potential, which we can detect in premotor areas, which would be kind of like right, right around there if you could see my brain. So if I'm going to do something like flex my hand or flex my wrist or raise my arm or some simple intentional action like that, there's going to be a readiness potential associated with that in premotor areas, and then sends information, makes its way to the motor area and then to the nervous system, and my arm goes up. This usually happens about half a second to 1 second before a consciously initiated action is performed. So say I'm going to raise my arm, well, about half a second to 1 second before that, you would see a readiness potential. If you were looking at my brain with an EEG. So what Liebe wondered was whether your conscious awareness of your urge to act also occurs in advance of your intentional action. So if your conscious intention to initiate the action, say your conscious intention to raise your arm, is what actually causes you to put your arm up, then your subjective experience of willing to raise your arm should happen either before or at the same time as the readiness potential happens, not after the readiness potential. So to work out what comes first, conscious intention to act or the readiness potential, Liebe needed to time a number of different events. He had to time the initiation of the action, the readiness potential itself, and the conscious decision to act, which we'll call W. Now, timing the action is very easy. Liebe could just have myoelectric sensors stuck onto people's wrists. Liebe was having people flex their wrists in this experiment. So these myoelectric sensors, similar to the way that the EEG can detect changes in electrical potential at the scalp, these myoelectric sensors detect changes in electrical potential owing to muscle movements. So when when you move, you can detect that electrical signal through the skin. So that's easy. We can easily tell when the action was performed by doing that. Timing the readiness potential was similarly easy. When we do these EEG studies, there's a lot of noise, right? We want to focus in on the one thing that we're interested in, and to do that, we have to do lots and lots of different trials. And without getting into the messy details, we have to do a lot of statistical analysis to get rid of the noise, as it were. For example, I'm trying to measure electrical changes in my premotor areas, but at the same time, when I'm wearing the EEG head cap, I'm also blinking, and the muscle movements from blinking cause a much stronger signal to be picked up on the EEG than my readiness potential. So we have to do these trials over and over and over again, average them out, time lock what we're looking for to certain events. And that way we can get rid of the noise. We can get rid of, the blinks or whatever other background noise there might be, right? So by averaging the timing of the readiness potential over about 40 trials for each participant, we could get the timing of the readiness potential. Measuring W, or the conscious intention to move, was trickier. People were monitoring an oscilloscope in this experiment, which has a little circular screen, and a dot of light revolves around the screen, kind of in a clockwise direction. And participants had to watch this dot moving around and then report the position of the dot, so where the dot was, on the face of the clock, when they experienced the conscious intention to move. So the idea is I'm watching this light going around in a circle, or I guess the way you see it goes like this. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's going around in a circle, and I have to be like, okay, so when the dot was at 12 o'clock, I felt the conscious intention to move. So that's a subjective self-report. And then measuring the action is easy because we've got the electrodes on the wrist, and measuring RP is easy because we've got the electrodes on the scalp, and we're averaging across many, many different trials. So now that we have a way to time the conscious intention, the readiness potential, and the actual action, we can see what comes first, the readiness potential, which is unconscious, or the conscious intention to act. Which one came first? Well, the readiness potential came first. In fact, on average, so across trials and across all the participants, oh, there's my coffee. Across trials and across all of the different participants in the trial, the readiness potential started about 550 milliseconds, plus or minus 150 milliseconds before the action was initiated. But the conscious intention to move occurred only 200 milliseconds before the action. So let's write this out. Let's use my whiteboard for a change. So here's time going this way. So here's what happened. So let's say the movement is here. So this is movement. We'll call that M. What comes first? Oh, can't see the whiteboard. Okay, well, don't worry about it. I'll show you. So this is 550 milliseconds. This is 200 milliseconds. All right, I'll show you like this. So hopefully you can see this timeline. Hopefully it's not backwards for you. It looks backwards on my screen. Is it backwards? Maybe that's what someone's telling me in the chat. Oh, you can kind of see. Okay, that's good. So just so time is moving this way, the readiness potential comes first. Then the conscious intention, then the movement. That's the order in which everything happens, according to Libet's results. Can I pin? I don't know what that means. I don't have the facility with Zoom to understand what you mean, Mohammed, but thank you for the suggest. Maybe that's for other people so you can see the screen. So that's really interesting. On a few of the trials, though, participants also said that they had been thinking about the action in advance. And in these trials, the readiness potential happened over a second before the action. The point is, what comes first is not conscious. Oh, I see. That's cool. All right, that's good to know. So this is kind of spooky, right? We feel as though we are the authors of our actions, right? Remember, that's the experience argument. Remember last time we covered two arguments for why, or two kinds of arguments for why we have free will. One is the moral responsibility argument, or one kind of argument is moral responsibility arguments. We need there to be free will if we're to be held morally accountable for our actions. But another type of argument is the experience argument. And those types of arguments say that, well, it seems to us that we are the originators or the authors of our actions. So we must be. But this experiment contradicts that, because this experiment showed that there is an unconscious sort of activity in the brain. You know, you're getting ready to flex that wrist or raise that hand or do whatever you're doing before you become consciously aware of any intention to move. Kind of creepy. But Does that mean we don't have free will? Well, not necessarily. Um, Liebe noticed that in some of the trials, he would see what looked like the beginnings of a readiness potential, and then it would sort of peter out and go away, and nobody would move in that case. And he asked his participants, what's going on there? And they would say, well, I kind of had the urge to move, but then I decided not to. Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. It doesn't prove that we don't have free will. It just well, what Libe said actually, rather than trying to show that the intention comes before the readiness potential, because it doesn't, right? These experiments showed that the intention always came after. Um, but like I was saying, some participants um, seemed to have a bit of a readiness potential developing, and then it went away. And he asked, hey, what was going on there? What were you thinking about? And they would say, well, I had the urge to move, and then I just decided not to move. Libe called this the conscious veto. So the initiations of these movements are unconscious, but consciously we can decide not to follow through with them. So, in the words of English psychologist Richard Gregory, we may not have free will, but we do have free won't, if you like. In other words, and this is, by the way, pretty typical of what we understand about brains. Brains are always coming up with motor plans for interacting with the environment. Even if I look over here at my office door, I look at the door, there's probably an unconscious um, motor plan getting ready that would enable me to get up and walk over there and open the door. But why don't I do that? Well, the brain inhibits me from doing so. I can also consciously inhibit myself from doing things. Maybe I have the urge to flex my wrist in a Benjamin Libe style experiment, but I simply decide not to. That would be the conscious veto. And there are very curious neurological disorders where this sort of inhibition fails. For example, there's one called environmental dependency syndrome, where you're unable to inhibit these sort of automatic motor plans that the brain generates. Say you had environmental dependency syndrome, and I put my cup of coffee down in front of you. You might look at that cup of coffee and just take it and start drinking it without realizing what you're doing. Doesn't matter that it's not even your coffee. The fact that the coffee is just placed in front of you is enough for your brain to go, hey, drink that coffee, why don't you? And so you do it because the brain does not inhibit you from doing that. So that's very curious. So Libe himself did not say that this does not mean this does not mean we don't have free will. What it means is when it comes to intentional action, the intentions always start off as unconscious, then we become conscious of them, and we can consciously disallow ourselves to go forward with those intentions. And he called that the conscious veto. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no free will. But it does paint a pretty interesting picture of how all of this works, neurologically speaking. So now we're on to the second set of slides. Now that we finished off the previous ones. There's a small section on indeterminism that I think is worth talking about here. How are we doing for time? Okay, we're doing pretty well. We might actually finish a little bit early today, which would be fine with me. So we learned last time that this sort of deterministic picture of the universe Really has a lot to do with the picture of the world painted by classical physics, right? Classical mechanics. Here we're talking about, um, right, like Laplace's demon. Everything is determined by the laws of nature and prior conditions, right? That's what the universe looks like if you're looking at it from a strictly sort of classical or Newtonian sort of perspective. But at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a sort of a revolution in physics. And I mentioned this a little bit last time. This was due to thinkers like Albert Einstein and others. Um, One of those movements, the one that Einstein is most famous for, concerns special and general relativity, which, as I said, deals with physics of very massive objects like black holes, or very fast moving objects, like if you were to travel close to the speed of light. Um, Relativity could tell you what would happen if you were to fall into a black hole or approach the speed of light, right? But another thing that Einstein actually helped usher in, even though he was kind of suspect of the whole enterprise, was quantum mechanics, and that deals with matter and energy on a very, very small scale, a subatomic scale. And quantum mechanics paints a pretty indeterministic picture of the world, right? This, for example, here, this image is an interference pattern, which we get from shooting electrons through a couple of slits, and whether um, we get different interference patterns depending on whether we measure the electrons as we're shooting them, whether we observe the electrons, right? When the electrons are being observed, and you say you have two slits and you can shoot an electron at them, if we're observing the whole process, the electron has a 50% chance of going through one slit or another, but we don't know which one it's going to go through, right? So an observed double slit experiment will give you an interference pattern where you have sort of two zones where um, the electrons are uh, impacting our detector. They'll either go through the left or right slit, but we don't know which one they're going to go through. And of course, if you don't observe, you get this weird interference pattern where the particles don't behave like particles, they behave like waves, which is this whole other weird thing. So don't worry about that. Or perhaps you've heard of Schrodinger's cat, right? Schrodinger's cat, the thought experiment. Who's heard of it, and who would like to take a crack at explaining it in the chat or via voice if you like? So Schrodinger's cat. I'm looking for Schrodinger's cat. I'll give you a hint. It's the one where the cat is dead or alive at the same time. Dead and alive at the same time. Yeah, the cat in the trunk. Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a way to explain how particles behave at the quantum level. So the idea is you have this cat in a box, and in the box is a little bit of some kind of radioactive material, which has a 50% chance of decaying within a certain amount of time. But because of quantum uncertainty, you don't know um, whether it will decay or not until you open the box. Now, this radioactive material is also connected to a device such that if it decays before the box is opened, it'll release some poison and kill the cat. Um, but we can't know until we observe whether it's actually decayed or not. And that's why Schrodinger says the cat is kind of dead or alive at the same time. Of course, the cat is not dead or alive at the same time. This thought experiment is not about what happens to the cat, really. It's about what happens to the to the particles. Um, and like Jose said, uh, this is all related to what we call the measurement problem. Like I could know the speed of one of these electrons that I'm shooting through here, but not the direction. Ooh, excuse me. Or I could measure its direction at the expense of knowing the speed. So also processes like radioactive decay are really truly random. We can only describe these processes probabilistically. We can't describe them deterministically like we can with classical mechanical problems. Does this quantum indeterminism save us from a deterministic universe? Does it mean that we have free will? Well, no, because randomness is not freedom. If things are random, then we still don't have the agency we need to count as free. That's the received view anyway. But some thinkers disagree. Robert Kane, for example, says that, well, maybe weighing our different options for action in any given situation, uh, maybe those options correlate with quantum indeterminacy. Maybe mental states, when you really get down to it, have something to do with, or maybe quantum mechanics can tell us something about mental states. Um, in any case, what he's saying here is that maybe mental states are reducible to different quantum states. That's what he means, I think, when he says that correlates with quantum indeterminacy. Although I'm trying to be charitable here because admittedly, this idea does not really make sense to me. But Kane's point is that the outcome that we choose might be random, but it's not arbitrary, right? It's based on reasons. And it's by making choices like this that we develop the character that we are, our character that we develop into. And if we embrace that character, the character that is formed by the choices we make, then we're still free, according to Kane. So what I have to do is make choices based on reasons and embrace the character that's formed as I do that throughout my life. Right? Maybe I decide, do I stay home and play video games, or do I go to the gym? Well, maybe I decide to go to the gym and get some exercise. And then over time, I get into the habit of going and I start embracing that aspect of my character, somebody who cares about getting a little physical activity in instead of just playing video games all day, for example, right? I am free because I've made that decision for reasons. That's what Kane says. I'm not sure I agree with him, right? Then again, the problem could just be a problem of levels of analysis. So at the quantum level of analysis, the subatomic level, a lot of things appear to be random and indeterminate. But at the micro level, and even up to the macro level, things appear quite determined. So, take, for example, billiard balls. At the macro level or even the micro level, we can describe their behavior quite deterministically, right? The cue stick will strike the cue ball, which will strike the 8 ball, which will land in the corner pocket, and it'll do so in this trajectory. If we had the sort of like Laplace's demon sort of knowledge, at least with respect to playing pool, then we would easily be able to predict the motions of all of the billiard balls on the table, right? But those billiard balls are made of atoms, and they behave. The particles that those atoms are made of behave according to the laws of quantum mechanics. So at a quantum level, things can seem indeterminate, but determined at a higher level of analysis. And maybe what's happening here is at the level of the mental, what we've got are emergent properties. Mental properties emerge from more fundamental ones in the same way that determined processes emerge from all this quantum indeterminacy. So our freedom of the will, if this is true, would be an emergent property. Our reasons, which form the basis of our actions, those are mental states. Those would also count as emergent properties. So that's another possibility. It's also possible that we're thinking about causation in the wrong sort of way. So Roderick Chisholm, who we encountered last week, argued that free acts are not the result of event causation, but of agent causation. So recall last time on Monday, we talked about event causation. Events are happenings, right? If you remember, they are, they can be complicated. So events can be made up of lots of other little events, like World War II, right? That's quite a complicated event, which was made up of lots and lots and lots of other events. But then there are more simple events, like putting your shoes on. Any change in the property of an object is an event. And when one physical object causes a change in the property of another physical object. So, for example, if a cue stick strikes a cue ball, which strikes the 8-ball, each physical object causes a change in the next object. It's a chain of event causation. But maybe free acts are the result of a different kind of causation. So agent causation is that alternative. And agent causation, according to Chisholm, is a power that we each have. A distinct a distinct causal power from event causation. It's a power that persons or selves have. When an agent acts, their actions are actually not caused by another event. It's as if we can, we as agents can simply cause ourselves to undertake particular actions. The key point here is that since my actions aren't determined by event causation, but by agent causation, I am free because I am free to have done otherwise. And Timothy O'Connor follows this line of thinking, right? O'Connor argues that event causation is fundamentally different from agent causation. Event causation is the power that one object has to affect another. Again, a cue stick, a cue ball, an 8-ball, so on and so forth. These are all governed by the laws of nature, right? Event causation is governed by the laws of nature, but agent causation is a sort of emergent causal power, and only intelligent agents have it. Does everybody follow so far? Let's see what everyone's saying in the chat. Anybody find this all a bit strange or mysterious? I mean, who thinks that this idea of agent causation as distinct from event causation makes sense? Or who thinks it's weird? Anyone have any thoughts either way? Hmm. Fair enough. It is a little weird, yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, I understand. Honestly, I get it. It does sound kind of mysterious. This is actually called the mystery objection. It almost sounds like agents are magic, right? Like, okay, in the world of physical objects, you have event causation, and that's the power that um, one object has to affect another. But agents are different. Agents have this power where they can kind of cause their own actions. Like a billiard ball can't cause itself to move. It needs another billiard ball to interact with it to cause it to move, to go from not moving to being in motion. But agents are like unmoved movers, if you like. Um, a lot of people will say, hey, that just sounds like magic. So that's the mystery objection. And then people who advocate for agent causation would fire back and say, well, event causation is weird too. I mean, you can't explain that either, which might sound strange, but no, it's an idea we've encountered before. David Hume, right? David Hume um, said that there's nothing necessary about an effect following from a cause. It's just that we observe this constant conjunction between cause and effect. But there's nothing necessary, logically necessary about cause and effect. It's just a sort of habit we have. That's why Kant came along and had to. It's like, whoa, 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 human, that can't be right. We need there to be cause and effect. And cause and effect is something that it's one of the ways the mind makes sense of our experience. It's one of the ways our mind organizes our experience, which is why um, all events have a cause is a synthetic a priori, right? Anyway, we don't want to get um, we don't want to get bogged down in that. Let's go on to compatibilism. So compatibilism is our middle ground. Remember, we have libertarians on the one hand, and libertarians, again, not like political libertarians, but metaphysical libertarians. They say we have freedom of the will because, um, at least some of the time, we could have done otherwise. Remember, you don't have to believe that every action we undertake is free. Um, I can't. I am limited in my options when it comes to getting to campus, right? I could take the bus. I'm free to take the bus. Sure, I got a bus pass. I can hop on the bus. I'm free to take a ride share, like an Uber or a Lyft. I'm free to take a cab. Um, I suppose I'm free to walk, although that would take a while. But I could do it if I wanted, if I really wanted. I cannot fly to campus, right? I mentioned this example last time. I cannot go on my balcony and start flapping my arms and expect to reach the campus. The laws of nature do not allow for that. I can't take an airplane to the campus. Where would I land it? Also, I don't know how to fly an airplane. I suppose I could take a helicopter in principle, but in practice, where the heck am I going to get access to a helicopter from, right? So it doesn't mean I'm 100% free, like, oh, I've decided I'm going to fly to campus today and flap, 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 flap. Next thing I know, I've arrived on campus. No. Um, but some of my actions are free. I'm free to take the cab or the bus or the Uber, right? Um, our determinists say, no, 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 everything is determined, right? Even your mental states, you think you're acting for reasons, but those reasons are ultimately physical. Your brain states, your mental states are ultimately brain states. And because your brain is a physical object, it's subject to the laws of nature. So we're back to hard determinism. Everything is laws of nature and prior conditions. And that's what determines everything. So these hard determinists see, unlike the libertarians who say we have free will and maybe the universe is not deterministic, maybe. Hard determinists say, well, the universe is deterministic and that is not compatible with free will. But compatibilists, as the name suggests, say free will is compatible with a deterministic universe. And there are some thinkers like Aristotle or David Hume who anticipate compatibilism. William James, who came a little while after these thinkers, called compatibilism soft determinism as opposed to hard determinism, because you're still a determinist. If you're a compatibilist, you're probably still a determinist, but you don't rule out the possibility of free action, right? But an important compatibilist was Jonathan Edwards, this 18th century thinker who believed that yes, our actions are caused, but we're still free because free will is just, I quote, the power, opportunity, or advantage that anyone has to do as he pleases. Or in other words, his being free from hindrance or impediment in the way of doing or conducting in any respect as he wills. And this emphasis is added by Crumley, by the way, who quotes Edwards on page 285. So our will is caused, it's determined, but it's determined by our motives and our choices. And this is what separates us from the machines, right? Edwards would probably agree with, somebody like Descartes, or later thinkers like William Offray de la Mettrie or Thomas Henry Huxley, who believed that we are machines. Yes, we are machines. The human being is a machine, a natural machine, but we have freedom of the will, unlike an automaton, which is a machine that does not have freedom of the will. So you can kind of see here the whole free will being compatible with the deterministic universe, because here, our actions are still determined. They're just not determined by events necessarily. They're determined by our own reasons for acting. And most contemporary compatibilists, like Edwards, similar to Edwards, see, as he said, being free from hindrance or impediment in the way of doing, or as we probably put it today, free from compulsion or coercion. Freedom from compulsion or coercion as important. It's not that our actions are not caused, or that they're caused by something mysterious like agent causation. It's that we're not being compelled or coerced. So if I'm being compelled or coerced, then my actions are not the result of my own decisions. For compare with when we rationally deliberate, which is something that compatibilists emphasize very heavily, right? Most compatibilists emphasize rational deliberation or acting on the basis of reasons. Do I want to play video games or go to the gym? Well, think about it. Feeling kind of blah, maybe some physical activity would improve my mood. I played video games all night last night, so I probably should do something productive. Um, maybe I'll go to the gym, right? Like that. You're deliberating, you're consciously thinking through and then making a decision. When you're compelled or coerced, this is absent. Some of these examples are drawn from the course text, by the way, and some of them are not. So imagine a kleptomaniac who's compelled to steal objects, right? or maybe somebody with an obsessive compulsive disorder and they can't help but perform specific behaviors or routines. Um, uh, we could call these internal compulsion. The compulsion, you are compelled, you're not acting on the basis of reasons, but the compulsion originates within you. In this case, there's some sort of, you know, disorder of thinking and behavior, which causes you to act the way you are. You're not stealing. If you're a kleptomaniac, you know, you're not stealing objects because you've rationally decided to do so, right? Or consider being late for class because the bus broke down. Um, or maybe there's a mad scientist and she's implanted a chip in your brain. Whenever she pushes that chip, you scream out pickles at the top of your lungs. You'd be sitting in class and the mad scientist says to her buddies, watch this, pushes the button, and you just stand up and scream pickles. But you didn't decide to do so. It's just that she's wired this device into your brain in such a way that you do this automatically whenever she hits this button. Or maybe there's some kind of crime lord who wants me to do a job for him, maybe rob a bank. Um, and I don't want to do it. But if I don't do it, he's going to kill my family. Well, probably going to rob the bank, I guess. That would definitely be an example of coercion. These last three examples, by the way, are examples of external compulsion or coercion because the source of the compulsion is from outside of the agent. Now, if you're a compatibilist, none of these can be free actions because they're all compelled. Free actions cannot be compelled. Free actions must be those of a reasoning agent, you know, an agent who acts on the basis of reasons, who consciously deliberates which action they're going to take, and who is not going on is not undergoing any form of compulsion or coercion. Now, critics of compatibilism will turn around and say, hang on, this thing that you're calling choice, this choosing, this is not really choosing at all. You know, they might say, for example, okay, you've got a reasoning agent. They're acting on the basis of reasons like beliefs and desires. Well, who cares? Because these are ultimately brain states. They're ultimately they're reducible to physical states. And so these two are actually determined by prior events and the laws of nature. And if this is true, then there's not really a sense in which our reasoning agent could have done otherwise. So they aren't really free. But a compatibilist might respond to this by saying, well, we're still free to have done otherwise. The agent would have done otherwise if she had chosen to do so. So this is the ability, this is what we call the ability analysis of can, right? And again, you can see the compatibilism, the compatibility here of free will in a deterministic universe. It's like, okay, well, you know, as long as the agent acted on the basis of her own reasons, it doesn't matter if those reasons themselves are determined. As long as she's acting on her own, on the basis of her own reasons and is not being compelled or coerced or anything like that, she's free. Kind of like Arthur Schopenhauer said, man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. Let's try and clarify this with some examples. What do you think Schopenhauer means there? And by the way, yes, I am using a different translation than the one Crumley uses for this quote in the book. But what do you think Schopenhauer means when he says that? Any ideas? Yeah, in a sense. It's like this. Say you're trying to decide between which snack you should have. Um, You like sweet things and you like savory things, but you don't really like fermented things. So you can choose, do I want to eat the slice of chocolate cake or the beef jerky? Do I want sweet or savory? I like both of those things. I can decide for myself, because I'm a reasoning agent, whether I would like to eat the cake or the beef jerky. I'm not going to eat the blue cheese or the Vegemite sandwich um, because I don't like those things. You cannot just choose to like those things. And that's the sense in which Schopenhauer means wills here, right? I can do what I will, but I cannot will what I will. Here I have the will to sweet or savory, but not the will to eat fermented food. And I can't make myself do that. So Schopenhauer is actually kind of a compatibilist. We've also got Harry Frankfurt here, um, who doesn't see free will as a matter of escaping determinism. Instead, freedom of the will is a matter of acting on those desires that we want to have. Kind of like oh, what was his name? I have to go back now. Kane, kind of like what Kane says, but without any of the quantum mysticism. Um, redefining what? No, 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 it's not. I'm not redefining anything. It's more like, you know, for Schopenhauer, will is a sort of blind striving towards certain things. So I can, like again, if I like sweet things and savory things, but I don't like fermented things, that's all part of my will for Schopenhauer, this blind striving toward things that I have. Um, so I can choose between the things that I will, but I can't will that I would will something else. So for Schopenhauer, there's a difference between choice and will. Yeah. It's kind of like or again, like what kind of music do I want to listen to on the way home? I've got pretty specific tastes. I like all kinds of music, but there's some music that I just can't listen to. But I have pretty wide tastes. So, maybe I'm on the way home and I could listen to some no, Schopenhauer would say no. No, your previous actions are all a result of your will. It's the will that influences actions, rather than the other way around. So, say I'm on the way home and I'm trying to decide what to listen to. There's plenty that I could pick from. Maybe I could listen to some blues or some classic rock or some heavy metal, right? Those are my three sort of go-to genres, right? I like all of those. So I could those are what I will. And I could choose any one of those genres, and that would be fine. But I could not choose a type of music that I don't like. I could not will that I like, and this is going to upset some people, Taylor Swift, for example, right? It's just not for me. Um, sure, I guess I could decide to put it on, um, but I wouldn't enjoy it, right? Um, so I can't will that, if that makes sense. But anyway, getting back to Frankfurt, so free will isn't about escaping determinism, right? It's a matter of acting on the desires that you want to have. And there are different kinds of desires, right? There are first order desires and second order desires. A first order desire might be like a desire for a piece of cake or to stay home and play video games or to sleep in on a cold day. But a second order desire are like desires to do with other desires. That's why they're second order. A first order desire is a desire for something, and a second order desire is a desire that has to do with a first order desire. So a second order desire, like if a first order desire is like, ooh, I'd really like to eat that slice of cake that's in the fridge. A second order desire might be something like, I'd really like to desire less cake. I desire to desire less cake. I'd like to kick my cake habit, right? Or think of like, think of like someone who's dealing with addiction. Um, um, well, no. You just, I would say you just learned something new about what you will, right? Like it just falls into that genre of music um that you enjoy. Again, this is what Schopenhauer would say. This is not necessarily what I believe. I believe, like, yeah, of course, tastes in music will change over time. Um, I'm sure there are people who um, have grown to, maybe they didn't like Taylor Swift at first, but now they do, right? I have to plug my laptop in. One moment. There may also be people who used to like Taylor Swift and then kind of went off of her, right? So, and maybe that's because they found some other kind of music and they realized, oh, I like this better. Maybe they started off on Taylor Swift and then they heard death metal or something for the first time and they were like, oh, actually, this is what I like, right? It could happen. Um, I'm just saying that Schopenhauer says, like, yeah, you have a choice within your will, but you can't will what you will. You can choose what you will, you can't will what you will. So go back to Frankfurt again. So think of somebody dealing with addiction, right? A first order desire might be to do the drug that you have a craving for. I think a lot of people who are trying to quit smoking um, must have to deal with this, right? Because you have that first order desire, like, oh, I need that cigarette, right? Um, but your second order desire, if you're trying to quit, is to desire not to desire cigarettes. So we should act upon those second order desires. Um, because um, that's what helps us to develop our character. It's a very virtue ethics sort of approach, which I know we haven't really talked about here, but something that you may want to be aware of. The key takeaway is that if you're a compatibilist, it does not matter that your choices are determined. What matters is what determines them. You're free if your choices are determined by your will, or if your actions are determined by your choices. So if you're a compatibilist, your actions need to be voluntary, they need to be uncoerced or uncompelled, but not undetermined. So your choices can be determined as long as they're not the result of compulsion or coercion and they originate from you, you're good. And this, by the way, is the view of free will that most legal systems adopt, right? Sure, maybe when you're undergoing sentencing for a crime, the judge or the jury might consider other circumstances, you know. Um, maybe going back to the crime lord example, I rob a bank. I get arrested. I go to trial. What's happened? Why'd you rob the bank? Well, You know, that crime lord said that he'd murder my family if I didn't. Oh, okay. Well, robbing the bank is wrong. You're gonna have to have some punishment, but maybe your punishment won't be as severe as if you decided one day, you know what, I could use some money. I'm just gonna go rob that bank, right? Or, the difference between murder and manslaughter, right? At least in the Canadian legal system, murder requires malice aforethought, right? You have to kind of have you have to have that guilty mind, right? That mens rea. Um, and then the different degrees of murder, first, second, and third, depend upon like, whether it's premeditated or not. Like, um, but with murder, there is an intention to take a life. With manslaughter, there is not. Sure, someone died and you're still going to get punished for that, but not as severely as if you decided to go and murder someone, right? And that gets us, kind of full circle back to moral responsibility. Maybe compatibilism is the way to save moral responsibility. Compatibilists would tell you that it is. Because as we've just seen, the reasons why you act matter, right? Intent matters when it comes to assigning moral responsibility, right? If I, commit premeditated murder, that is arguably more wrong than if I'm driving safely, but some freak accident occurs, and I kill a pedestrian. I've still killed someone. I will face consequences for that, but they won't be as severe as they would have been had I just gone and murdered someone. Kind of like, and I've done this before, I admit, I accidentally step on my dog or my cat's tail from time to time, because they're small and they're all the way down there on the floor. Um, and I always feel guilty when I'm like, oh no, I'm so sorry. Give them pets and give them some treats, and they're always fine afterwards, because it's an accident. And I feel bad about it, but nobody would be like, you monster, because you accidentally stepped on your pet's tail. If you went around stomping on your pets all the time, though, that would be quite bad, and we would hold you morally responsible for that. We would say that you're being needlessly cruel, right? Or like if I stop a robber, maybe I'm in a hurry to get to the convenience store and I drive up and park right in front of the door. And in the process of doing that, I stop a robber from leaving. But that's not my intention. I'm just trying to get in there and get that pack of cigarettes because I'm succumbing to my first order desire for cigarettes, right? You probably wouldn't praise me for that the way you would if I had like intervened and disarmed the robber. Although you probably should never do that, right? Just this is an example, if you're ever walking into a convenience store and there's a robbery underway, you should probably just stay out of the way. You don't want to get yourself hurt, right? So intention matters. If I intend to do something good or bad, then when it comes to assessing my moral responsibility, whether I should be praised or blamed, my intentions matter. And that's because, yeah, my actions are determined. They're determined by my reasons for acting. And that's why I can be held morally responsible. And that's why compatibilists are compatibilists. Free will is compatible with the deterministic universe, and it might even save moral responsibility. So that's all I have to say, actually, about freedom of the will. So we finished a little early. It's only 10 after. But I don't mind. Do you mind? I don't mind wrapping up a little early. Do you? Unless you have any questions. Yeah. I mean, pretty much. Oh, that's good. I like not being in a rush. I have to rush here, as I was saying earlier. Um, I think most everybody is watching these lectures online after they're posted anyway. And even well, that's generous. Certainly not most everyone is watching these lectures. I think a good portion of the class is tuned out by now, which oh, thanks, Bronwyn. That's good. But for those who have tuned out, it's going to be rough when it's time to write the final exam. So I'm glad that you guys are all here. Um, you'll definitely be better prepared. Yeah, well, I can answer some questions about the essay because as I was going to say, well, I don't have anything about the essay, but the essay is due on the 8th, so that's next Friday, so it's coming up. And quiz number 2 closes tonight, so definitely get that done. Next week we're gonna have 3 classes because we only had 1 class during that week after Thanksgiving. So we'll finish the final chapter on Monday and Wednesday, and then on Friday we'll do a little exam review. But that's it. That's all I have for now. So thanks everyone. I will answer. I'll stick around for a couple minutes and answer Taylor. I'll answer your questions about the essay. However, I will stop recording now. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in, and have a great weekend, everyone.